Priscilla Presley has survived Elvis, worldwide fame, and heartbreak most of us can't even imagine. But what just hit her now may change how the world remembers her forever. In the last few days, whispers have turned into headlines, hinting at a massive multi-million-dollar battle brewing behind closed doors, a disturbing accusation tied to her daughter's final moments, and a tell-all memoir that threatens to flip her entire story on its head. And trust me, whatever you think you know about Priscilla, this will shake it. Stay with me because what just surfaced will leave you questioning everything. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a story that's gripping fans, stirring controversy, and turning one Hollywood icon's world upside down. And trust me, what you're about to hear isn't the typical Presley family nostalgia or gossip. This one runs deeper, hits harder, and has sparked a wave of questions no one saw coming. We're going to walk through Priscilla's remarkable journey, how she went from a quiet teenage bride navigating the overwhelming gravity of Elvis Presley's universe to a confident, strategic businesswoman who rebuilt her identity piece by piece. Her evolution has always been dramatic, emotional, and often misunderstood. But none of it compares to the shocking twist that just burst onto the headlines. This newest chapter is unlike anything she has faced before. So stay with me, because when you hear what she's being accused of now, accusations that have split the internet straight down the middle, you'll understand why this story is spreading like wildfire. Supporters are defending her fiercely, critics are questioning everything, and everyone else is stuck somewhere in between, wondering what's real and what's simply too dark to believe. Before Priscilla Presley was a household name, she was just a quiet, sensitive girl being dragged from base to base by her stepfather's Air Force career. New towns, new schools, new faces. Just as she would start to settle in, it was time to pack up again. That constant motion left her feeling like she never fully belonged anywhere. Always the new girl, always adapting. It's important to remember that long before the bright lights and cameras, she was a child learning to live with uncertainty, isolation, and the nagging sense that her life wasn't fully under her control. Then came Germany. She was only 14 when she met Elvis Presley, who was 24 and already a global phenomenon. To the outside world, it sounded like a fairy tale, a shy teenager catching the attention of the most famous man on the planet. But behind the fairy tale headlines was a very real power imbalance, a young girl still figuring out who she was, and a man whose life was already larger than life itself. What looked like a dream from the outside often felt more complicated on the inside, with Priscilla trying to balance teenage innocence against the overwhelming gravity of Elvis's world. As their relationship deepened, she eventually moved into Graceland as a teenager, stepping into a world that most people only ever see in magazines or documentaries. Imagine finishing high school while living in a mansion that never truly sleeps. Staff everywhere, fans at the gates, reporters circling. Her every move was watched, commented on, and quietly judged. While other teens worried about prom or college applications, she navigated strict rules, late-night studio sessions, and the constant pressure of being Elvis's girl in a house that revolved around him. Their marriage in 1967 seemed like the natural next step in the story everyone was already telling about them. Lisa Marie's birth should have been the happily ever after moment, the beautiful child of a legendary couple. But behind the photographs, their life together started to fracture under the weight of fame, Elvis's infidelity, and his growing dependence on pills. The fairy tale castle had cracks in the walls, and Priscilla felt them widening every day. By the time she walked away, Priscilla wasn't just leaving a husband. She was stepping out of a global myth. When Elvis Presley died in 1977, the entire world seemed to stop. Fans lined the streets, newscasters spoke with trembling voices, and Graceland became a shrine overnight. But while the world mourned loudly and publicly, Priscilla grieved in silence. She had lost not just an icon, but a man who had shaped her entire youth, her marriage, and her young adulthood. Behind closed doors, she was suddenly faced with a tidal wave of responsibilities she never asked for but couldn't ignore. The weight of preserving Elvis's legacy and protecting her daughter fell squarely on her shoulders. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Graceland, which had once been a symbol of Elvis's success, had become a financial sinkhole that was draining the family's remaining resources. Most people in her position would have sold it or shut it down. Priscilla did the opposite. She studied business strategies, surrounded herself with experts, and made the bold decision to open Graceland to the public. That single choice transformed the estate into a world-renowned museum and a financial empire. She didn't stop there. She reinvented herself through acting, executive roles, and brand partnerships, proving that she was far more than the girl the world once associated only with Elvis. Through all of this, Priscilla took on the role of protector with fierce dedication. She guarded Elvis's image with almost military precision, fighting off bad deals, preserving his music rights, and making sure his legacy remained polished, respected, and profitable. Everything she did had a clear purpose: to secure Lisa Marie's future and, eventually, the future of her grandchildren. Business meetings, legal negotiations, estate planning, Priscilla learned to navigate it all, often alone, often against people who underestimated her. Her relationship with Lisa Marie remained complicated yet deeply bonded. They shared the same grief, the same pressure of living in Elvis's shadow, and the same constant scrutiny from the public. Lisa Marie's own battles, 4 marriages, addiction struggles, the heartbreaking loss of her son, and the challenges of maintaining her music career, kept Priscilla in a state of constant vigilance. Every triumph they experienced felt hard-earned. Every setback felt amplified by their family's history. They loved each other fiercely, even when life pulled them in different directions. For years, it seemed like Priscilla had done the impossible. She kept Elvis's legend alive, protected her family, and transformed crisis into legacy. To the public, she appeared unshakable, graceful, composed, and always in control. But what no one saw was the quiet tension building beneath the surface, the kind that comes from decades of being the gatekeeper of a worldwide phenomenon. And eventually that pressure was bound to break. In the years that followed, Priscilla seemed to slip into a quieter chapter of her life. She gave fewer interviews, chose her public appearances carefully, and carried herself with the calm dignity of someone who had spent decades under the harshest spotlight imaginable. To many, she looked like a woman easing into a well-earned semi-retirement, gracefully stepping back while still serving as the quiet guardian of the Presley legacy. There was a peacefulness to her presence, as if she had finally found a rhythm the world couldn't disrupt. But peace rarely lasts forever, especially in a life built on decades of fame, business deals, and partnerships that never fully disappear. Behind the scenes, old contracts began to resurface. Pages she hadn't looked at in years suddenly became important again. People from her past, individuals she once trusted or worked with briefly, started reappearing with questions, concerns, and demands. Documents that had sat untouched in drawers for decades were being reviewed, dissected, and held up like pieces of a puzzle she didn't even remember assembling. Something wasn't right, and Priscilla knew it. She could feel a shift in the air, subtle at first, like the stillness before a storm finally cracks open the sky. After all these years, after all the battles she had already fought, a new one was forming on the horizon. And deep down, Priscilla sensed that whatever was coming wouldn't just challenge her reputation. It would threaten everything she had spent her entire life protecting. When Priscilla announced her new memoir, Softly As I Leave You, Life After Elvis, it caught people off guard in a way she probably didn't expect. She had already shared her story once, decades ago, so the idea of her returning with a fresh, deeply personal account raised eyebrows instantly. Why now? Why revisit the past after so many years of carefully curated silence? The timing alone sent ripples through the media, hinting that Priscilla had more to say, and perhaps more to finally confront. The memoir promised revelations that went far beyond the glittering fairy tale image the public had always associated with her and Elvis. It offered new layers to their relationship, complex, emotional, sometimes painful truths that had never been fully explored. It highlighted her evolution from a sheltered young wife into a sharp, capable businesswoman navigating a world that often underestimated her. And woven through those chapters were raw, heartbreaking reflections on losing Lisa Marie and stepping into the role of grandmother, carrying both love and grief with her every day. It wasn't just a retelling, It was a reawakening. As soon as word of the memoir spread, the spotlight swung back toward Priscilla with full force. Media outlets rushed to cover the announcement. Fans debated what might be revealed, and suddenly her name was everywhere again, trending online, popping up in interviews, and even reaching a new generation, discovering her through recent films and television portrayals. For the first time in years, the world wasn't just talking about Elvis. They were talking about her, and with that renewed attention came a wave of curiosity that grew louder every day. But here's where everything shifted. The memoir was supposed to give Priscilla her voice back, allowing her to reclaim her narrative and finally speak on her own terms. Instead, opening that door invited something much darker into her life, something she never could have predicted. And as we move deeper into the story, this is the moment where everything changes. The peace that Priscilla had been holding on to shattered the moment two people she once trusted, Britt Cruz and Kevin Fiallo, stepped forward with a stunning lawsuit. These weren't distant figures or casual acquaintances. They were insiders, people who had worked closely with her, managed aspects of her affairs, and stood beside her during some of her most vulnerable years. Their move wasn't small either. They sued Priscilla for an eye-watering $50 million, instantly propelling her into the center of a storm she never imagined facing at this stage of her life. Their accusations hit like a series of blows. Cruz and Fiallo claimed Priscilla had concealed past business deals from them, agreements she allegedly made years ago, long before they entered her world. They insisted she secretly sold rights tied to her own name and image without informing them, despite their belief that they were part of every major decision. And perhaps the most damaging claim of all, they accused her of deliberately using their expertise, connections, and hard work, only to cut them out once the deals turned profitable. In their version of events, they were the architects, and she was the one who locked them out of the house after it was built. But Priscilla didn't stay quiet. She fired back with a countersuit that flipped the narrative entirely. In her filing, she accused them of elder abuse, stating they had manipulated her during one of the most devastating times of her life, right after losing Lisa Marie. She claimed they mismanaged her money, inserted themselves into decisions without her full understanding, and steered her into deals that benefited them far more than they benefited her. Priscilla argued that instead of helping her, they isolated her, took advantage of her grief, and controlled more of her financial world than she ever intended. For the first time in her long, complicated life, Priscilla Presley wasn't standing in Elvis's shadow or guarding his legend. She wasn't the former wife, the businesswoman, or the quiet matriarch. She was the center of her own scandal, one that threatened not just her reputation, but the very legacy she had spent decades protecting. The accusations didn't stop with contracts or business deals. Cruz and Fiallo pushed the situation into far more dangerous territory. One of their most explosive claims alleged that Priscilla had concealed a $25 million collection of jewelry and Elvis memorabilia from the IRS. These weren't small keepsakes or sentimental items. They were pieces that collectors would fight over at auctions, items with enormous historical and financial value. If true, this wouldn't be a simple oversight or record-keeping mistake. It would suggest large-scale tax fraud, something that could shake the Presley legacy all the way down to its foundation. But even that paled in comparison to the darkest accusation they leveled against her, an allegation so heavy and emotionally charged that it left people stunned. Cruz and Fiallo claimed that Priscilla chose to end Lisa Marie's life support in order to secure greater financial control over the estate. To be clear, Priscilla and those close to her vehemently deny this claim. Still, the mere suggestion, however unproven, landed like a strike to the heart. It introduced a moral weight that transformed the situation from a legal battle into something far more personal and painful. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Fans who had admired Priscilla for decades were shocked, unable to imagine her making such choices. Others, fueled by the drama, quietly muttered that, "Where there's smoke, there's fire." Online discussions turned heated as people took sides, arguing over what felt more believable: decades of loyalty and protection, or a twisted plot hidden behind wealth and legacy. Media coverage shifted almost overnight, from sympathetic stories of a grieving mother to analytical breakdowns, questioning who she really was. Suddenly, every headline had a sharper edge. And as all of this swirled around her, one truth became inescapable. Whether the accusations are true or not, the damage is already done. Doubt, once introduced, has a way of lingering. It slips into the cracks of a reputation, reshaping how people see the past and how they judge the present. For Priscilla Presley, that doubt has now become part of her story, and there's no turning back from it. At the heart of this legal firestorm lies something far bigger than lawsuits and accusations. What's really at stake is the future of the entire Presley legacy. Control over the Elvis brand, the preservation of Graceland, and the long-term direction of the estate all hang in the balance. These aren't just business assets. They're pieces of American cultural history. And beyond that, there's the financial security of Lisa Marie's children, who are now the last direct heirs to the Presley name. Every decision made, every legal twist, could shape the lives of Elvis's grandchildren and the fate of the empire he left behind. What makes this situation even more jarring is the stark contrast between Priscilla's past and how she is being portrayed now. This is the same woman who once took a struggling, nearly bankrupt Graceland and transformed it into a thriving museum that draws millions of visitors from around the world. She was celebrated as the guardian who rescued Elvis's legacy from collapse. And yet today, those same hands that preserved his world are being accused of hiding its greatest treasures. The mother who buried her only daughter with unimaginable grief is now painted by her accusers as someone who may have benefited from her death. The contrast is almost surreal, like the story is being flipped inside out, and it forces us to ask some uncomfortable questions. If Priscilla's reputation collapses under the weight of these allegations, who becomes the moral authority on Elvis's legacy? Who decides what is authentic, what is preserved, and what the world is allowed to see? And perhaps the biggest question of all, how much of what we think we know about famous families is carefully managed, and how much is actually real? In a story built on love, money, myth, and memory, the line between truth and perception has never been thinner. Right now, Priscilla Presley's world sits at a crossroads with no clear path forward. The lawsuits against her could explode into a full public trial, dragging every detail into the spotlight, or they could quietly settle behind closed doors, leaving the public to fill in the blanks with speculation. At the same time, the release of her memoir has the power to reshape everything people think they know about her. It could restore her image and remind the world of the woman behind the legend, or it could deepen the divide and leave her reputation more vulnerable than ever. Nothing is certain, and every outcome carries its own consequences. But here's where you come in, because in the end, it's not just the courts that decide Priscilla Presley's fate, it's all of us. What we choose to believe, how we interpret the allegations, what narratives we allow to take root, all of that shapes her legacy just as much as any legal ruling ever could. Public perception has always been a powerful force in Hollywood, and right now Priscilla's story is unfolding in real time, influenced by every conversation, every headline, and every viewer forming an opinion. So I want to know what you think. Do you believe Priscilla is the victim of greedy advisors who saw an opportunity during her most vulnerable moment? Or do you think she finally pushed things too far and crossed a line that can't be ignored? And should decades of protecting Elvis's name, decades of preserving his history and his home, outweigh the weight of these new allegations? There isn't a right or wrong answer here. There's only the conversation, and your voice is part of it. If you want more deep dive breakdowns of the stories behind the headlines, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel more than you know. And when you're ready, check out the next video linked on screen where we explore another shocking celebrity legal battle that shook the industry. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.